Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all 389 Bach chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Komm, Heiliger, Herre, Gott, which translates to Come, Holy Spirit, Lord God. Buckle up, folks. This is a very lengthy chorale. It's just, the harmony itself isn't too difficult to analyze, but just the sheer volume of content in this chorale is pushing the limit, maybe a little over the limit of what I was hoping to analyze on a daily basis, but just by the amount that I had to squeeze onto one page, you can see that there's a lot of analysis today, so hope you're looking forward to it, and let's dive right in. So we have one sharp in the key signature, we start on G major, we end on G major. I'm betting we're in the key of G major, and of course, like I just said, we start off on that one chord, C, C, G, and E. That is a C major triad in root position, or a 4 chord, passing tone in the tenor, and then we have D, A, F sharp, and D. That is a D major triad in root position, which is a 5 chord. We have a passing 7th in the soprano, and then we have E, E, G, and B. And depending on how you look at this, you can call it 6 or you can call it 4-6. I'll just go ahead and call it 4-6 because I kind of hear this as an accented non-chord tone, but they're basically the same chord for all intents and purposes, so I'll offer both analyses. We then have B, D, G, and B. And this is the main reason why I said 4-6 over 6, because 4-6 is more likely to go to 1 than 6 is, but you'll find that 6 goes to 1 in this chorale anyways, so maybe it doesn't even matter. But then we have a passing tone in the bass before we cadence on 5. Our first cadence is a half cadence. Then we have a very quick cadence afterwards, a very short phrase. It's only 5 beats in length if you include all of the beat values, but it's very short. I'm going to call this a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D major, so we'll say this G major chord that we get on the next beat, or the first beat of this phrase, is our pivot chord. It's a 4 chord in the key of D major. We then get E, E, G, and C sharp. That is C sharp diminished, which is 7-6 because it's over E, not in root position. And then we cadence on D major, which is our 1. Our next phrase is a perfect authentic cadence in the key of G major, so we're looking for a modulation point, and I reckon that we're right here. We'll just say that this was a brief introduction of D major, and we're pivoting right back to G major because immediately afterwards we have D major going to G major. That's unmistakably 5 going to 1. And we have a very similar progression that we had originally in our first phrase, 1 going to 4, C major in root position, C, C, G, and E. We then have B, D, G, and D. That is a tonic triad in first inversion, 1-6, passing tone in the bass, and then we have D, D, F sharp, and A. That is a D major triad in root position. We have some passing tones in the upper voices as well. We then have A, E, A, and C, and we can call that a 2 chord. However, something that we can analyze between this 5 and 2 is actually a passing 1 chord. We have D, D, and then we have G and B in the upper voices, which makes more sense because 5 going to 2 is not a normal progression. If it occurs in the music, then that it is what it is, but it's not a progression that you're likely to come across in comparison to a passing 1 chord interrupting the 5 going to 2. Then again, if 2 wants to go to 5, why can't 5 go to 2, right? I think if the voice leading's smooth, that's fine, but I think it has more so to do with the trajectory. 2 wants to go to 5 because 5 wants to go to 1, whereas if you go in reverse, 2 doesn't have that same pull to 1. So it's about trajectory and direction, but ultimately we have a little passing tone in the tenor because it's part of a 16th note figure, and then we have actually 2 going to 1, B, D, G, and B. Granted, it is inverted, so it's feel like it's more so about the bass movement and preparing for the cadence than anything else. But it is interesting nonetheless. Passing tone in the bass. We then have D, D, F sharp, and A. That is a D major triad in root position. Passing seventh in the tenor. And then we cadence on 1. Alright. So moving ahead, I believe this next phrase ends in a half cadence. Maybe there's an argument to be made that we modulate to the key of D major. I don't know. I hear it as a half cadence, so I'm going to analyze it in the key of G major. We have another G major triad at the beginning of the phrase, no need to reanalyze. We then have F sharp, A, D, and A. That is a D major triad over F sharp, which is 5-6. Passing tone in the soprano. We then have E, E, G, and C. That's a C major triad in first inversion, or 4-6. And notice how, similar to a chorale we looked at recently, he moves up by step in the bass, and that almost alludes to a passing 7 chord, but because we're missing that A here in the alto, we don't get it. He suspends the G for actually quite a long time, for 2.5 beats, which does not give us that full 7 chord, but we do get the 7 in the bass. So that is something to bear in mind, because I have been analyzing a lot of passing chords between 4 and 1, which is what we get on the next beat. G, D, G, and B. Then we have some passing tones in the soprano and the tenor. And then we have G, B, G, and D again, so that's just another tonic triad. Some passing tones in the lower voices and a neighbor tone in the alto. And let's see if that's analyzable. We have A, F sharp, and D. Let's call that a passing 6-4, right? Why not? And then we have B, G, G, and D. That is a tonic triad in first inversion. Passing tone in the bass. And then we have D, D, F sharp, and A. There's our root position D major triad with a passing 7th in the tenor. We then have E, B, E, and G. That is an E minor triad in root position, so a 6 chord with passing tone, or kind of like a little filigree pattern in the tenor. Oh, no, actually, no, that is a passing tone. Sorry, I was not looking ahead. It just goes back to this A. We then have F sharp, A, D, and A. That is a D major triad in first inversion because it's over the F sharp. Passing tone in the bass. We then get A, D, and E, but it really is this C sharp and this octave leaping down of the A on the next beat that really reveals this 5 chord. 5 of 5, because A major is the dominant of D, which is our dominant in the key of G major, which is our 5 chord. Alright, next phrase. We have a half cadence, but we go to a different key. We go to the key of E minor. And this cadence is kind of interesting because it kind of springs it up on you. I wasn't sure if it was a perfect authentic cadence in the key of B minor, or if it was a half cadence in E minor, but after listening to it long enough, it makes sense that it's in the key of E minor. So, looking ahead, we don't modulate for a while. We're still in the key of G major. So we have B, F sharp, D, and D. That is a B minor triad in root position, so a 3 chord. We then get E, G, E, and B. That's where we expect 3 to go to. E minor, which is 6. We then have D, D, F sharp, and A, another root position D major triad, which is 5. And then we have G, D, G, and B, which is our tonic triad. We have some passing tones in the upper voices and the tenor, and that spells out G, C, A, and C. Kind of a 2 chord being alluded to there, but I don't really think it's enough to analyze. We then get G, B, B, and D, which is kind of an interesting chord because we get F sharp and A happening on this beat as well. And because we're going to the key of E minor, the fact that he has the F sharp there is quite interesting. Even if he was going to the key of B minor, that would be equally as interesting because F natural is not diatonic to either of those keys. However, it might be alluding to the fact that we have a Phrygian half cadence here, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. because they do pop up from time to time. But F sharp, A, B, and D, that does spell, as sort of a passing chord right here, that does spell 2. That would be 2 of 4 of 2. So if we wanted to look at this phrase in the key of A minor, because we have a little A minor ideation going on, we could just say that there's a little bit of A minor going on here, and we have a 2, 6, 5. Then we have E, G sharp, B, and D, which is a 5, 7 chord in the key of A minor, with a passing tone in the tenor, and then we cadence on 1 here, which actually in the key of G major is 2. Actually, this was actually my modulation point, so I'll go ahead and say that we've modulated to the key of E minor here, and now it's a 4 chord, as opposed to saying it's a 2 chord in the key of G major. It would be true, but because we're preparing for a cadence in the key of E minor, I think just going straight to E minor from here saves me some space on the page and makes the analysis look a bit more elegant. So we have A minor going to B, D sharp, G, and B. I reckon this, did I say G sharp? B, D sharp, G, and B. I'm going to call that an accented non-chord tone. He's sort of playing with the idea that, oh no, never mind, that's not G sharp, that's G natural. That would be odd. That would be an augmented 3 chord, which is not unheard of, but they're significantly less common than the 5 chord that I think is being implied here. And then we get C, E, E, and A, which is an A minor in the key, over C, so that would be 4, 6. And then we cadence on B major again, which is 5 in the key of E minor. And that's what makes this a Phrygian half cadence. The half step motion down in the bass, and the stepwise motion up in the soprano, but mostly the half step motion in the bass going down from 6 to 5. That's what gives it the Phrygian characteristic. At least that's what the textbook says. All right, next cadence, we have a half cadence in the key of G major. So we're looking for a modulation point, and I reckon that we're right here. We see E minor here, and we have a passing tone in the soprano, but I think we've modulated to G major already, and we can call this E minor 6. It immediately goes to B, D, F sharp, and B, but I reckon that this F sharp right here is an accented non-chord tone, kind of complementing how this G is an accented non-chord tone in comparison to that F sharp. We have G sharp, B, and D, which is G sharp diminished in first inversion, so that would be 7, 6 of 2, tonicizing A minor again. Then we have A, C, A, and E, which is our 2 chord, and that's why it makes sense that this G sharp is the chord, the note that we're looking for. It's really just a fragment of A melodic minor. We have some descending passing tones in the lower voices, and then we have F sharp, A, and D. 2 generally wants to go to 5. This time it's going to 5 in first inversion. Then we have some more descending passing tones, again in the bass, but this time in the alto. And then we have D, D, F sharp, and A. That's another D major triad, but this time it's in root position. We have some more passing tones, this time in the inner voices. And then we have G, B, D, and B. That's a G major triad in root position. Our tonic triad. Some passing tones in the lower voices. We then get E, G, E, and C sharp. That's C sharp diminished over E, which would be 7, 6 of 5, as C sharp is the leading tone to D major. And then we cadence on 5. This is why I think it's a half cadence. Even though we have chromaticism and it seems like we might have modulated, I think there's an argument to be made that we have modulated to the key of D major. I still think it's a half cadence, especially because we just get G major afterwards. But then again, it's such a nebulous concept, like a perfect authentic cadence in the key of the dominant versus a half cadence. They're both really achieving the same thing. They're emphasizing the dominant, just one is taking it a step further by fully modulating, and there really has to be agreement in both the melody and the harmony. And as you can see here, the melody does have C sharp in it, and it's A, B, C sharp, and D, which now the more that I think about it, the melody is outlining D major. It just sounds like a half cadence to me. Maybe it's just the bass movement. There is a formula here. It could be 1-7-1, or 4-7-1 in the key of D major. And you know what? I will mark that, because the more that I talk myself through it, the more I'm thinking we might have modulated. But all in all, whether you hear this as a half cadence or whether you hear this as a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D major, I think both are totally analytically correct because they're achieving the same thing. The fact that G happens immediately afterwards makes me think that we are in the key of G major still. Bach does the same thing here, where G immediately happens after this phrase as well, that I said was a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D major. So I really do think it's 6 of one, half dozen of another. All in all, when I first listened to it, it sounded like a half cadence to me. I'll stick to that analysis, but I will offer the D major analysis if that's how you so want to hear it, or maybe not necessarily want to hear it, but how you do hear it. Okay, but anywho, we do immediately go to 1 afterwards, G, B, G, and D. We then have C, C, G, and E, another root position 4 chord happening after a tonic triad, giving us vibes of the first phrase. We then get B, D, G, and D, kind of like the second phrase, or the third phrase rather, 1-4, 1-6, even the bass is the same. We have a passing tone. Then we have D, D, F sharp, and A. That's a D major triad in root position. Passing tone in the soprano. E, G, E, and C. That's a C major triad in root position, first inversion. And then again, look how we don't have a complete 7 chord here because the G does not move up to A. We only have the 7th movement in the bass, so it is 4-6 going directly to a tonic triad. But notice how Bach still includes 7 in one of the voices to smooth out that transition. Otherwise, it's moving from one chord to the next via a third, which is not as common, I guess. I don't know. It's just something that Bach does a lot, and I've noticed that pretty much all 4-6 chords, or 4 chords that go to 1 in root position, are bridged by that leading tone. Like up here, for example, and in lots of the other chorales that I've looked at. We have a leap down to a non-chord tone here, and then we have D, F sharp, D, and A, which is our root position D major triad, our dominant, and then we have G, B, D, and G, a 1 chord. I forgot to mention this is a perfect authentic cadence. Alright, moving ahead to the next phrase, we have another one of those nebulous phrases. Again, I'm hearing these more and more like half cadences, but I think there's an argument to be made that we have modulated to the key of D major. I'll offer both analyses, just like how I did for this phrase right here. So we have another tonic triad, the literal exact spelling. D, F sharp, D, and A. It's a root position D major triad, so a 5 chord. Passing tones in the tenor and the soprano. We then have A, C, and C, which is kind of an interesting chord. It's another 2 chord, but we have a doubled third and no 5th. But again, we have kind of like an analytical dilemma here, or I'm calling it an analytical dilemma. I'm not saying that you need to have one too, but 5 going to 2 is kind of a red alert in my brain. So I think what's happening here is we also have a passing 1-6-4 chord, because we have G, B, D, and D. And generally with 6-4 chords, it's not always the case, but we usually see the 5th doubled in the chord as well. But yeah, seeing it go in the other direction twice now is kind of interesting. It's actually very interesting. Passing tone in the alto after our 2 chord. We then have E, G, E, and B. This is a 6 chord. It's kind of like we have a sequence going in the opposite direction because 2 wants to go to 5. 6, which is what this chord would be, or actually I'm not going to call it 6. You might analyze this as 6, but for the same reason that I analyzed this chord right here as 4-6, I'm going to analyze it as 4-6 as well, because the next chord we have is a 1 chord in first inversion, B, G, D, and D, which is just 1-6. But yeah, you can call it 6 if that's how you hear it. I just think it's more common for 4 to go to 1, but they're really achieving the same thing. And I want to keep the analysis consistent because the same thing is happening in both voices or both instances. We have some passing tones in the alto and the bass. Let's see what that does. E, D, yeah, already not a chord. C and G, not a chord that would be used during Bach's time, so these are just passing tones. We then have D, D, F sharp, and D. Is that right? D, D, F sharp, and D. Yeah, that would be a 5 chord without a 5th, which is interesting. Neighbor tone in the alto and in the bass. That takes E, D, G, and D. It'd be kind of a stretch to call that a neighboring 6 chord because there's no actually a 6-7 chord without the 5th. It might be possible, but I don't think it's really contributing too much to the texture to analyze it in the same way that like a passing 1-6-4 would normalize the progression. But all in all, we have again another D major triad on the next beat. We then have C sharp and E going on as well. This is the first instance of a passing C sharp that doesn't really contribute to the it contributes to the overall texture, but there's not really an analyzable chord here because of this D. If we had C sharp, A, and E going on, and this was another E, or if this was another C sharp, that would be totally cool. But the chord isn't really analyzable using the tertian means that Bach was used to at this point. So we have some passing tones, and then we have, actually, let me double check. We have D, D, F sharp, and D. No, yeah, that's right, sorry. And then we have B, G, D, and G. That is a G major triad in first inversion, which is just a tonic triad and over the third of the chord. Passing tone in the bass. We then get G, A, D, and F sharp. I reckon this G is an accented non-chord tone. Then we have F sharp, A, D, and F sharp, which is D major over F sharp. It's a 5 chord in first inversion. We then have G, B, D, and E, which is interesting. If we analyze it that way, what is going on here? I guess that is a 6 chord. That E is suspended over it. So I guess that's a 6-6-5 chord, because this would be E minor over G. So 6-6-5, or E minor 7 over G to be more specific. So 6-6-5 going to A, C sharp, and E. It's a root position A major triad. And then we have passing 7th. And then we have D major, which is 5. Sorry, this is not just 5, it's 5 of 5. And the more I look at this, the more it looks like a perfect authentic cadence, because if we analyze it this way, we have, let's start right here, for example. We have, if we start in the key of D major here, or maybe even earlier. Yeah, actually we totally could analyze earlier. If we say we're in the key of D major here, we could say that we have a 1 chord, that's C sharp right there, and then we have 1-6, which would be G major in first inversion. That would be a 4-6 in the key of D major. Then we have another 5-6 chord, which is now our tonic. E minor 7 over G is our 2-6-5, and we know that Bach loves his 2-6-5 chords. And then we just have a normal 5, because this is no longer a secondary dominant. And then we cadence on 1. I think there's arguments to be made for both 6-6-5, 5 of 5-5, is just a roundabout way of saying 2, 6, 5, 5, 1 in the key of the dominant. It just doesn't sound. Actually, when I look at the melody, it's the same as right here. We have 5, 6, 7, 1 in the key of the dominant, as opposed to here we have 1, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which very much sounds like the key of D major. As far as calling it a modulation is concerned, that's just not the way that I hear it. I could be wrong, but what matters is, I guess, the fact that I can acknowledge the fact that maybe he has modulated the key of D. I just hear it the way that I do. And the fact that he immediately goes to G major afterwards, that also impacts my hearing as well. So whether you're analyzing this in the key of D major or whether you're analyzing it in the key of G major, I think that's entirely your prerogative, so long as you're aware of the fact that these melodies kind of fluctuate between the idea of two different keys occurring at the same time. Alright, we're in the last system finally. We've been going for a long time now. Let's take a look. So our next phrase is a perfect authentic cadence in the key of G major. Notice how the phrases are getting longer as we're going towards the end. Actually, we have a pretty long phrase going on in the first system, but the phrases are regularly getting longer towards the end. We have G, B, D, and D. That's a tonic triad in root position, passing seventh in the bass. We then have E, B, E, and G. That is a 6 chord in root position, E minor. And remember, this G is not a non-chord tone, it's just a third below. And then we have D, D, F sharp, and A. That is a root position D major triad, which is 5, our dominant. We have a passing seventh in the bass before we go to B, D, G, and B. That is our first inversion tonic triad, G major over B. We get A, G, or A, C, G, and C. Again, sort of this idea of the passing 2-7 chord, but I don't really think it's enough to analyze because it's not really. Actually, well, let's see. We have G, B, G, and D. We could say there's a passing 2-7 there, but really, I don't know. 2 going to 1 is still kind of a strange progression in my eyes. G, B, G, and D. That's just a root position tonic triad. We then get F sharp, D, A, and D. It's like a passing 5-6 chord. I'll analyze that. 1 going to 5. Let's see where it goes. It goes from F sharp to G sharp. We have G sharp, E, B, and D. That is E7 over G sharp. So that would be 5-6-5 of 2. And we would expect that to go to A minor, which is our 2. A, E, A, and C. And this puts us in kind of an interesting situation because we know with 2 chords, it's uncommon for 2 chords to immediately go back to 1. So kind of what happens is with this F sharp here, we have F sharp, A, and C. So it's kind of weird. We kind of have the reverse of what I typically analyze, which is when I see a 2 chord going in between or going to a 1 chord, it's usually associated or accompanied by this 7th scale degree, 6, 7, 1, and it's usually 7, 6 going to some type of tonic triad. But the fact that we are preceded by the secondary dominant, it locks us into analyzing this as a 2 because that's where we expect it to go. But I don't know, I'll offer the analysis there. And then 2 going to 7, I suppose that's okay. It just makes less sense than 4 going to 7 because 2 and 7 share 2 notes in common. So the progression isn't as, I guess, as like solid as 4 going to 7 or 2 going to 5. But that being said, that I don't know. 2 is a predominant and 7 is a dominant functioning chord, so who knows. We have a passing 7th in the alto. We then have C, A, E, and A. That's 1 going to 2 in first inversion. That's just A minor over C. And then we have C sharp, B flat, E, and E. We could say this B flat is an accented non-chord tone, very beautiful accented non-chord tone. And we can call this A, C sharp, E, and E, which would be 5, 6 of 5. because we know A major is the dominant of D. And then we have D, A, D, and F sharp, which is our 5 chord, which leads us to G major, G, B, D, and G. Awesome. Let me use musical terms. Penultimate phrase, we have a perfect authentic cadence, not a perfect authentic cadence, a plagal cadence in the key of G major, which is very interesting. 3 perfect authentic cadences in the key of G major. My intuition kind of fires off a flare there, or there's like an alert going on with my intuition, because 3 perfect authentic cadences in the same key is kind of suspicious. It's grammatically, it's like a lot of G major, so I would expect a modulation or some type of cadential structure to break it up. Alright, we have D, D, F sharp, and A. That's a dominant triad in root position, D major. We then have G, D, G, and B. That's a tonic triad in root position. Passing tones in 3 of the voices. Let's see if that analyzes to anything. A, C, G, and A. Another one of those passing 2 chords that's really interesting. But it just goes immediately back to a G major triad, just this time it's in first inversion, B, B, D, and G, with some passing tones in the tenor and the soprano as well, where we get B, A, D, and F sharp, which is another passing 3 chord. I really do think these passing chords are just a byproduct of the passing tones. That makes sense. That's why they're called passing chords, right? But all in all, I don't think they really strengthen the progression. They're just a product of the fact that the voices are moving. But yeah, let's move on. We have C, G, D, and E. This D is just a 9/8 suspension over the bass. This is just a root position C major triad. Passing tone in the bass, neighbor tone in the alto. We then get E, G, C, and E. That is a C major triad in the in first inversion, so that's just 4/6. We get a passing 7th. F sharp, G, C, and E. Again, this held over G keeps our 4/6 chord going directly to C, which would make it a perfect authentic cadence. Or, sorry, it wouldn't make it a perfect authentic cadence. It would make it an imperfect authentic cadence. But the reason why I think I hear this as a plagal cadence has to do with the fact that we get the 5 in the melody, which is relatively uncommon. I can't think of a time where we've had an imperfect authentic cadence where we have the 5 in the melody. It's usually the 3. So the fact that we have a cadence that has something other than the tonic or other than the 3 in the melody is a little suspect. So that's why I think it sounds more like a plagal cadence than anything else. But this F sharp does throw us for a loop. This G, however, it could have gone up to A and then back down to G to make this an imperfect authentic cadence, but he didn't, so I guess it's plagal. Alright, last phrase, we're almost done. Perfect authentic cadence in the key of G, as we expect most chorales to end in perfect authentic style. We then have secondary dominance right off the bat, or right out the gate. F sharp, A, D sharp, and A. That's D sharp diminished over F sharp, which is 7/6 of 6, as D sharp is the leading tone to E, which is our 6, our submediate. We then have E, G, E, and B, which is our E minor triad, which is our 6. Some passing tones in the inner voices. We then have B, B, G, and D. Root position, first inversion tonic triad. We have 6 going to 1/6, just like how I kind of wrote it off here. We have the exact same bass movement going on from E going down to B and C. But I called it 4/6 here because I find it more common for 4/6 to go to 1. It just sounds better because of the fact that, the reason I think it sounds better is because the chords have less tones in common. So when you progress between 2 chords that have more than 1 tone in common, it sounds a little bland. But Bach is able to really liven it up, spice it up, by adding neighbor tones passing tones and other ornaments to make the progression more interesting. But then we have C here, and we have G, which is a chord tone, but this C is a passing tone in the bass. We then have D, D, F sharp, and A. This G right here is a 4-3 suspension over the bass, but really what's being implied here is a big 5 chord. And then we cadence on G major, G, B, D, and G, which would be our perfect authentic cadence. That was a really lengthy analysis. Thank you so much for sitting through the video. All in all, yeah, there's a lot to meditate on after this chorale, just because of the amount of content that's there. We had some interesting inverse, or not inverse, what's the word? There's a word that I've been using. When something can go in the other direction, the transitive progression. So like 5 going to 2, or 6 going to 3. Those are examples of what I've been calling transitive chord progressions, because they break the flow of going to 1 via the dominant. They would be pointing in the direction of going to 1 via the subdominant if you continued that cycle. But all in all, the big thing here is that maybe I'm just listening to these wrong. They sound like half cadences to me, but they analyze so much better in the key of the dominant, which makes me feel like I'm wrong with the way that I'm hearing it. But I think I need to be more lenient with myself. I'm already very lenient with my analyses. If there's a viewpoint that I can't quite agree with, or if my viewpoint isn't fully verifiable, like I'm confident with the way that I've analyzed it, I'll offer an alternative analysis. So, yeah, I try to do that in as many cases as possible. I'm sure that I've missed a couple, as I've definitely grown as an analyst these last couple of months that I've been doing these videos. But all in all, whenever there's a half cadence, Bach really likes to infuse the leading tones, and it just makes it nebulous, because I hear them as half cadences because they modulate very close to the cadence, and really the idea of G major isn't it's very consistent and static in our brain after listening to a chorale in the key of G major. So where do we draw the line? I don't know, but I continue to try and be as consistent as possible with my analyses, just because I might as well be, if I'm going to be drawing back towards these drawing from these analyses in the future. I want them to be consistent and not have like this massive shift like halfway through. But that being said, yeah, the cadences continue to be the most interesting things to me, because it's like a half cadence and a perfect authentic cadence, or an authentic cadence in the key of the dominant. However we choose to call it, they're achieving the same thing, and the label is somewhat arbitrary. But because I know a lot of people who are watching these have gone through sort of like the music education pipeline at the college level, or maybe you're in AP music theory, or taking like one of the ABRSM exams or something like that, I want to use conventional vocabulary for you all. That being said, I enjoyed today's analysis. It was nice to have like a lazy Sunday where I was able to just sit and analyze a longer chorale. It's good that it happened on the day that I don't have work, so very nice. Okay, that was today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for continuing to support the channel. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.